Hello everyone, happy new year to you all. Welcome to year 2026. It's not too late to wish you that because it is the maiden edition of our new program series for the first quarter of the year 2026. I'm excited, I'm thrilled to be finding my way to your devices. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we do appreciate all our listeners who joined us throughout last year 2025, on all our programs around from Mondays to Fridays. Thank you so much for joining us. This quarter, we will be unraveling the program titled Global Trade and Supply Chains. It's Ease Mortgage Radio Communications, and of course, I remain your host, Titilola Ogunshono. Global trade and supply chains have become the backbone of modern economy. They do connect businesses, corporations, producers, consumers across the world. Likewise, global trade and supply chains are vital to achieving United Nations UN Sustainable Development Goals, from poverty reduction to climate change. We are living through a massive recalibration of how the world moves value. In 2025, global trade broke records despite wars and tariffs, hitting a whole $35 trillion. Let's stop for a second. Look at the phone in your hand, look at the coffee on your desk, look at the beverages on your table, look at the shirt on your back, look at everything, your jewelries, everything you put on, your accessories. None of this just happened. It is the result of a massive, invisible ballet of economics and logistics that never sleeps. This is global trade. The $35 trillion engine of our modern existence, and keeping it alive is no other than the supply chain. The supply chain is a nervous system that connects a cobalt mine in the DRC to a battery factory in China, and also a showroom in California. But the story, interestingly, isn't just about volume. It's about complexity. The reality is that there are quite some complexities around global supply chains. We could have a product with many components from various countries, the same component be assembled in another country and also sold in various markets across the globe, and this definitely will come up with a lot of complexities. However, when the system works, you don't notice this. You don't notice the complexities because when it works perfectly. But when it breaks, that's where the challenge lies. That's where the bottlenecks would arise, like we saw in the Red Sea or during the pandemic. The world stops, spikes spike, shelves go empty, and it leads to a lot of governments, a lot of nations panicking. Let's go a bit down the memory lane. Let's go to when the world experienced the COVID-19 pandemic, which revealed the fragility and vulnerability of our global supply chains. And this further reiterated the need to ensure that we proactively build more resilient, adaptable, and responsive structures. Thus, as numerous companies, firms, businesses, nations navigate the post-pandemic era, they need to begin to rethink supply chain strategies in order to remain competitive. Becomes a front burner issue. So we'll be looking at the global trade dynamics. What is global trade? I'll give us two definitions according to Adam Smith, and also according to David Ricardo. Adam Smith is a classical economist who looked at absolute advantage theory. And according to Adam Smith, when it's about global trade, is the exchange of goods and services between nations based on efficiency in production, allowing each country to specialize in what it produces best for mutual benefits. And also, according to David Ricardo, talking about the comparative advantage theory, global trade is a system of international exchange driven by comparative advantage, where countries gain by specializing in goods they produce at lower opportunity cost. That is according to these two great economists. And we also have the modern economic perspective by Paul Krugman, the new trade theory, which says that global trade is an interconnected system of international markets shaped by economies of scale, specialization, and strategic economic integration among nations. So from all these definitions, you see something has come out, very strongly, is that global trade is not just merely moving boxes or packages or items. Rather, it is the exchange of value across our borders. It is a practical application of comparative advantage. The idea that if Vietnam is better at making shoes and a country like Germany is better at making cars, they should trade and both will be richer. So you specialize in what you have comparative advantage, where you can produce at the least opportunity cost. That way you can make more profit, and that's the idea of trading across the borders, moving value across the borders. So let's look at our $35 trillion reality. Though at the start of 2026, statistics have shown that the numbers are a bit staggering. But let's look at the total volume was really high, where the global trade hit a record of $35 trillion in 2025. Now, you see that for the breakdown, let's have the breakdown. The goods and merchandise accounted for about 25 trillion, and we had services which accounted for about 7 to 8 trillion. Now, let's look at the trend. The trend, we see that the trading goods, was actually growing approximately at about 2%, while trading services is quite exploding, as you can put it, growing at nearly about 9%, and that is quite significant. Like trading services, we had an increase in digital consulting, in finance, in software, and in tourism. So, as an analyst you come to see a dematerialization of trade. Now, some are advocating and also proposing that it's easier to export code or financial advice than it is to ship a car. So, if you're a business leader, you are asking yourself this question: can I really digitize my product? Is that way this product can be digitized? And if you find a way to do that, your export market would just have gotten, way bigger and easier to reach, greater population across the globe. Now, we've said that the global trade is the engine, and we said the supply chain is the nervous system. So let's go to the nervous system. The supply chain, what is it? Okay, and also you can say that the blood trade is the blood, while the supply chain is the veins and the arteries. Okay, so what is supply chain? Okay, it is a network of organizations, people, activities, information, and resources involved in moving a product or service from the supplier to the consumer. Okay, it's a whole value chain, even some from the raw materials to the final consumers. And there have been various trends in global trade and supply chains, one of which is the shift towards regionalization and nearshoring. As companies, firms, organizations seek to reduce their reliance on distant suppliers, and also to mitigate their various risks, both of the risks that they can actually mitigate, the unsystematic risk. This has had implications on global trade. Okay, and of course, we'll discuss this further on subsequent episode in this quarter. And I've also been going concern on sustainability and responsibility in global supply chains. We've had various stakeholders, the companies, government, customers demand higher levels of transparency and accountability. And of course, this has influenced the changes in how goods are produced and are being transported. The various trends that we've also seen, we see technological advancement also transforming global trade, innovations like blockchain, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, the likes of it have actually transformed the way things are done around supply chains and even influencing global trade. Also, of course, we have the trade agreement, the tariffs, various government policies being formulated by nations have also played a huge role in shaping global trade. trade. We've also had the emergence of e-commerce, which has also been a game changer, okay, because expectations of consumers globally has been on the rise. Consumers they expect faster and more flexible delivery options, okay, because they know that this would help them perform efficiently in their business operations, and that will also impact their bottom line, their profitability level, and also their own sustainability goals as an organization. Of course, we have to have issues like the trade wars, protectionism, and also rising inequality that we experience across the globe. Still on supply chain, very interesting, we also have the efficiency versus the resilience war. For 30 years, the goal, so much in terms of supply chain, inventory management has always been what we call the JIT, one of the inventory management techniques, the just in time, a place where you want to keep it lean, keep zero inventory so you can save your money. But the post-2020 world has faced a shift, a major shift from the JIT to the JIC, what we call the just in case. You see company holding more inventory, they're also friendshoring. That means they're moving factories to friendly countries and nearshoring, moving factories closer at home. And so what is the implication for these, on the global space? What is the implication of these, in terms of the efficiency, in terms of performance of global trade? What's the implication of these on countries across the globe? What's the implication of these on continents around the globe? Because definitely it's going to have both positive and also adverse effects on some countries, and some will feel it more than the other. So fortunately, we'll still learn more on all of these issues in the course of this program in this quarter. I promise you it's an interesting quarter. Okay, we'll be looking at a lot of various issues that we're going to be very expository. So what are the main bottlenecks or challenges that we've seen around this theme that we're discussing, the global trade and supply chains? There are quite a lot, but I will just look at maybe just three now. I like three. And let's look at the first one is geopolitics. Okay, we can take it away. It's one of the issues, causing strife around the globe. We have the wars in Ukraine, the Middle East, and they've turned shipping routes into conflict zones. And of course, let's forget the recent one, the Red Sea crisis, which forced ships to go around Africa. And what this has done is that added extra days to journeys, about 10 to 14 days. And of course, this is going to impact costs. We've had, costs spiking, remarkably, that way, and that goes back to the final consumer. You're going to affect the prices of, prices of goods that have been transported. Okay, and we also have the climate volatility. We are seeing logistics climate change. We've seen drought in the Panama Canal and floods in manufacturing hubs. And these have also stopped trade significantly and also had adverse effects. And we're going to be looking at these again. Then, of course, the third one I'm going to mention is the talent gap. We have robots, but we don't have enough humans who understand complex logistics. So we see the industry facing a massive brain drain, which has to be checked. If you are just joining us, thank you so much for joining us. The program is Global Trade and Supply Chains. It's an Amalgate Radio Communications. This is the maiden edition, and we are just giving an overview of the global trade. What is it? Talking about supply chains. What are the top issues around it? Looking at the $35 trillion reality, and of course, looking at the engine, and also looking at the supply chain dynamics as well. Okay. So let's go into looking at the titans of trade. Who is winning? Okay, well, we are all winners. Every country is a winner. Okay, but let's look at those, because whether I like it or not, we live in a multipolar trade world. And let's look at the leaderboard with regards to 24-25 data set. Looking at the top exporters, I want to look at the factory nations, those we call the factory nations, measuring who makes and sells the most. At number 3, I have Germany. The export volume is about $1.7 trillion. That's Germany at number 3 with the data set I was able to get. And what we look at the primary strength. And when we talk about primary strength is, as a company, you say focus on where you are very strong at. Focus on your strength, and your strength will turn to opportunities for you. And for other countries that still, struggling behind, work on your weaknesses so they won't become threats to you, achieving economic resilience, threat to you achieving economic growth and development, threat to you having high ADI, human capital development, and increasing the standard of living of the people. So at number 3 here, we have Germany at about $1.7 trillion export volume. So talking about the primary strength, what I see is that they have specialized high-tech manufacturing, automotive and chemicals. At number 2, we have the United States of America, the USA. The export volume is about $2.1 trillion. And looking at where their primary strength lies, we have the high-value aerospace. Of course, you can't take the fence away from them. Okay. Of course, we have the energy, the oil and gas, and digital services. You can't take that away from the United States of America, the USA. At number 1, I just want to look at, we're looking at considering the best 3, in terms of ranking the export volume. At number 1, we have China with a total of 3.6 trillion. So if you're talking about 35.3 and we have one country, with 3.6 trillion, that is massive. And of course, the primary strength is it is the undisputed world factory dominating electronics, machinery, and batteries. That is, we call them the winners. Who is winning? Okay, yeah, we're talking about the factory nations, the top exporters. Now, interestingly, I just want to look at the top importers as well. We're talking about global trade. At number 3, we also have, interestingly, we have Germany. And the value of that import value is 1.4 trillion. So it's not about the fact that you cannot import. Yes, we import, but when you import, you should also but it's 1.4 trillion in terms of import volume, and also they have exporting 1.7 trillion. So it's safe. It's a safe place. It's still surplus. Okay. The BOP is still going to be surplus position, positive surplus position. And what do they do? The role of this, I want to look at the role of the import volume in the economy, is that they import intermediate goods to finish and re-export. Yes, when you import to fuel your investment process, when you import so that you can also re-export, you're also earning more. Let's look at number 2. Interestingly, at number 1 in terms of the top exporters, we have China, 3.6 million in terms of the export volume. And number 2, we have China, 2.6 trillion in terms of the import volume. They import raw materials like iron, oil, and components to fuel their factories. Okay, but you look at this, we look at the import volume vis-a-vis the export volume, which is very favorable, which is surplus position, positive position. And measuring who buys the most around the globe, of course, no other person at number 1 space than the United States of America, where the import volume is about 3.4, ranges between 3.4 trillion to 4 trillion dollars, and they are considered to be the consumer of last resort. And whether like it or not, you can take that away to a very large extent. The U.S. market still drives global demand. Okay. Now, like we said, what is important is that we is exporting more than you import. When we have the case of the China, the case of the USA, and what really happens is that this imbalance, we look at it in some cases, is the root of many geopolitical tensions, the trade wars, happening across the globe. Okay, now we're talking about the best, the top importers, the conventional nations around the world, also the factory nations around the world. So it's so interesting to see that the 1, 2, 3, those who talk about the factory nations and all the world. It's also interesting to know that these are also the consumer nations around the globe. So very interesting, analysis here. Yeah, but we spoke about it, but I want us to go and bring it back to Africa continent, because the first 3, exporters and the top 3 importers are not located on the continent of Africa. Okay, so what makes Africa peculiar? What are the statistics of Africa? What are the bright spots for Africa? Please stay tuned. We'll be right back after the short commercial break.
Harmogate, founded in 2008 out of a desire to build transgenerational structures for organizations, institutions, and nations. We have worked with large businesses, international development organizations, and public sector ministries and agencies. Harmogate, our uniqueness is that we do not just work for you, we work with you. For example, we do not leave you to the task after sourcing talent that will help the new hire settle into robust leadership development programs. We are technical experts in advising and supporting institutions on strategy and leadership, artificial intelligence, strategic human resource management, public sector reform, finance, audit and tax, FAT, and strategic communications. We do all this and more out of a desire to transform nations through institutions and organizations. For further inquiries, email contact@thearmogate.org or call +234 810 999 6666, +234 807 957 4151, and +161 0504 6026. www.thearmogate.org. Armogate, building to endure and transforming nations through institutions and organizations.
Thank you so much for joining. Okay, before we went for that short commercial break, I said we're going to narrow down, come back to the continent of Africa, to the African continent. So let's look at the statistics, as we couch it, that the expert having about 17% of the world's population, Africa account for about 2.9% to the range of 2.9% to 3.3% of global trade. And if you look at it, you see that there are some salient issues for this. I want to look at the extraction trap. Globally, Africa is known as a source of raw materials where you get the likes of the crude oil, the cocoa, the gold, the cobalt. But unfortunately, of course, things are changing. We see nations around the globe, around the African continent, bringing in policies to improve this. But we still sadly to know that Africa is still a buyer of finished goods. In spite of us having those raw materials taken out of Africa, of the continent. We also have the value lost in value, because what happens is when you export crude oil out and import petrol, we have some nations now doing refinery. Okay, like Nigeria, we know that we have indigenous refinery now. But what you do anytime you export out your crude oil is that you're exporting jobs, potential jobs out. And of course, when you're importing, we are going to be faced with what we call imported inflation, and you see that the value is added outside of the continent, not within the continent. Okay, so aside from the extraction tab, the lost in value, where maybe that are part of the reasons why we have about 2.9% to 3.3% of the global trade. Now let's look at what are the bright spots for Africa. And there are quite some bright spots for us as a continent. The trade growth is one. You see that the African trade actually grew by about 13.9% in 2024, and that's what I'm saying, that we are moving there. It might be the pace might be slow, but it's still commendable. Okay, yes, nothing is cast in stone. It grew by 13.9% in 2024, reaching about 1.5 trillion. And analysts have advocated that the continent is recovering faster than projected, than expected. And I think that's a place to laugh and to say thank you, to our policymakers, to government, ensuring every one of us on the African continent, ensuring that these things are in place. We also have the pivot east. Is also no longer news that Africa is no longer solely reliant on the West. Okay, we also have China and India now account for about 23% of the African trade. And of course, what also has changed is that we have the game changer, the AfCFTA. It's a game changer. We have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the world's largest free trade zone by number of countries. And the major goal of the AfCFTA is to fix the fact that Africans don't trade with Africans. Okay, is to promote intra-African trade. which has proven to be historically very low, okay, compared to Europe. But however, the intra-African trade is growing. It grew by 12.4% in 2024. Yes, some have advocated that it is still very slow, but I'll also say that it can be a walk in the park. It's also, it's growing slowly. It means is an ongoing process. ING, that is improvement, and we hope that there'll be more improvement. Okay, so let's go on again to look at the supply chain reality in Africa. Okay, why is it so challenging? Why are there so much bottlenecks? Why is it so problematic? Okay, why so hard? The supply chain reality in Africa. Okay, now let's look at, whether I like it or not, one thing that stood out very strongly is the infrastructure deficit. Okay, you realize that sometimes it's always cheaper and faster to ship a container from outside of Nigeria, maybe from Shanghai to Lagos, than from Lagos to also even other countries. Okay, and of course we also have the border friction, where bureaucracy acts as a massive tax. Okay, you have trucks that could spend days waiting at border crossings, and of course we have the issue of connectivity. We still have a challenge around having a unified rail network. We mostly rely heavily on expensive road transport and foreign shipping lines. Okay, these are part of the issues that we have around supply chain in Africa. But we spoke about the growth, so definitely if we have a 12.4% growth in intra-African trade, and if we can fix some of these bottlenecks, so definitely we know that there'll be improvement around the continent. Okay, but like you said, today's maiden edition is an overview of everything, and we'll be looking at some other topics, as we go on in this quarter. So some of the questions we're asking ourselves is, why is Africa still fighting for just 3% of the pie? And who is really winning, this trade war going around the world? And of course, we want to ask yourself, as a business entity, as a corporation, are you ready for the next supply chain shocks that could come in for the year? Are you building resilient, responsive, adaptable supply chain structures, processes, systems with your business as you think and as you compete in the global space? Well, this is all we can take on today's maiden episode. I hope that you have learned one or two. I told you that for this quarter there'll be a lot of interviews from experts in this field. We'll be sharing insight on a lot of issues, burning issues happening globally in the space of the global trade and supply chain issues around the globe. Okay, please ensure that you join us on our other programs around Mondays through Fridays. My colleagues have also very intriguing, insightful, interesting programs for this quarter. You'll be learning a lot from. And for your feedback, your questions, it's not too early to send the questions, the suggestions, areas you want us to touch on. Just saying, you can send to contact@thearmorgate.org. And of course, for your training needs, Armorgate has got you covered. The website is www.thearmorgate.org, and you can check us up on our website, our social media handles. Okay, we have the Facebook is Armorgate, the LinkedIn is Armorgate, Instagram Armorgate. And before I go, I'll drop this quote. Remember that global trade is not just the exchange of goods across borders. It is the exchange of destinies, where supply chains have become the lifelines that connect economies, sustain livelihood, and shape the future of nations. Till I find my way to your devices next Friday, the same time, 5 p.m. WAT. I remain Titola Ogushana saying bye from here.